Amit, welcome. Welcome joining Pratik and myself for the Leaders Who Care series. It's great to have you here, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me both.
We're ready to go. You said you're ready to rock. We just had some good conversation before this that then we realized, man, we should have recorded that. So now we got to remember what we said. No, we got some really good stuff ahead and we're looking to learn some from you and hear more about you. So Pratik, you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and great to see you, Amit. So would you mind introducing yourself briefly for the audience?
Sure. I'll go backwards in time. I think makes it a little bit different. So today I run a VC fund in Silicon Valley. I have the logo right behind me here. It's called Tau Ventures. It's an applied AI fund focused on seed investments. I look into health, I look into automation, so cars, robots, I look into enterprise. There's a lot more online if anybody's curious. But before that, I've spent time working in two other firms in venture capital. I've built my own startup. I've worked at a large corporate, Google. I've gone to business school in Boston, and I've gone for my undergraduate and graduate degrees in Silicon Valley. So I've lived at two very different parts of the US. And even before that, I was born and raised in Brazil, in a small city on the coast is where I was born. And then I did my high school in the capital of Brazil in the middle. And ethnically and culturally, my family comes from India. I've lived in India, I've invested in India, I've worked in India. So I also subscribe to India very much. And I consider myself a citizen of the world, but I do have citizenships from all those three countries. Aside from career, aside from 20 years almost working in technology, primarily in Silicon Valley, I've also built a nonprofit. That's a whole another story that I'm sure we'll talk more today also. But a very short summary, the nonprofit is focused on rural development in Eastern India. We've crowdfunded and built infrastructure there, a library, a high school lab, and a hospital, which is by far the biggest project.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, we talk a lot about in our era about the why. Everybody's why, but we kind of like to ask it a little bit differently. More specifically, as we delve into your background, why do you do what you do?
So my wife won't get fed up from me and kick me out of the house. No, I'm joking.
Are you really joking?
I'm sorry?
Are you really joking?
But I think what you're asking is a deeper question, which is you do something because you find meaning in it. Obviously, I'm doing what I do because I need to have bread on my plate and feed myself, right? Like I have to have some income. There's many ways of having an income. There's many ways of spending your time. I choose to spend it the way I do because I find myself fulfilled in what I'm doing. And I think fulfillment for me is very much, I'm doing something that is in perhaps a small way making the world better. I'm enabling other people. That's what venture capital, I think, ultimately is. When you work with startups, you work with entrepreneurs, you are partnered with them. They're the captains of the ship, you're the first mate. The job is to make sure that the ship can sail through very rough seas and get to its destination. So I enjoy that aspect, having been on both sides of that equation. And in terms of the nonprofit, I do get asked that question a lot, is why are you working with people on the other side of the world that I don't have any blood connection that I'm aware of? This is not where my family comes from. This is not where I was born and raised. And the pragmatic part of that answer is that because I can do something there, because I have the right networks and the right ways of operating to make something happen. But the other flip side of this is, why not? Like, if you can spend some time making a positive impact in the world, why wouldn't you? So to me, it's a circular question. Why do it? And my answer is, why not do it?
So you spoke about fulfillment, and you also spoke about positive impact. And that takes me to my next question. So it's been decades, that's taken for people to realize that aligning corporate brands, family offices, and investors like you with social impact is now vital and very important for attracting talent and keeping talent. That's what you were saying in your last few words. And you've lived in a lot of countries, 3 countries. You've been engaged in a career with tech. Then you ran a special not-for-profit in India where you utilize your talent for impact. And now you're running a VC fund. So why don't you share us with the audience your journey on how this happened, how this migration from one country to the other, from one sector to the other happened, and how do you think how can you differentiate yourself as one of the leaders who care and as you play an active role as a venture capitalist?
Wow, that's a lot to unpack there, Pratik. I'll try to do justice to your questions there. So how do those jumps happen? I mean, every single choice, major choice especially, has a story behind it. Some of it is planned, most of it isn't. Most of it is kind of like that meme that people may have seen on the internet on how success or how life looks like. It's never a straight line. It's like goes up and down and backwards. And I find that very true for myself also. It's, I think, more about the values. It's how you make those decisions. The exact specific decision may change. I may have ended up at company A versus company B. I may have ended up working for this particular person or that particular person, but it's the way in which I work, the values I seek, the values I cultivate that I want to imbibe in myself. But going back to your very, very cogent question, I ended up in Brazil because my parents moved there. They're professors, and when they were in their early 30s, they moved from small cities in India. So that wasn't necessarily a choice that I made. And I was born and raised in a small place because that's where they were at the time. I ended up spending until the age of 13, so my childhood there. And then my parents ended up going to the capital of Brazil. There's a whole another story on how and why that happened, but that's why I moved to there and did my high school there. And thereafter, as an adult, it's really my decisions. I wanted to broaden my horizons, to put it in a very cliche way. So I applied to universities here in the US, and I got accepted at Stanford, which was probably the second best decision I've done in my life. And it was such a blessing to be able to come here and to study with some of the finest minds in the world, to really learn so much and be exposed to so much. So that's how I ended up in Silicon Valley. And then I just fell in love with this place. I thought that the excitement and the energy, the innovation, the mindset here is just incredible. Don't get me wrong, there are certainly problems here, but the possibilities that this place created was just incredible. And I ended up staying here. I just ended up getting a job, and then I did leave for a little bit. I went to business school at Harvard. So that obviously took me to Boston for a couple of years. That's the other side of the US. But then I decided to come back. And then I ended up building a company here, ended up joining venture capital. And how that happened is, if you live in Silicon Valley, you invariably get exposed to startups, no matter what you do. And I know you two obviously work a lot with startups, right? The excitement, the energy, the vision that startups bring is precious. There's obviously a lot of risk, but at least for me, being in Silicon Valley, that felt like a natural course. I did study computer science and biology, so I'm both a scientist and an engineer at heart. And I tried to ally those two as I went through my career. And I started going more and more in the direction of startups. And I ended up playing both sides of the coin here, investing in startups and then building startups. And I found that I enjoyed both processes, but I ended up finding that the type of person I am, who really loves to learn, really likes to be of help, is a good fit for being a venture capitalist. So what I'm trying to do now through this fund is to be the type of investor that I would have wanted to have invested in me when I was an entrepreneur, and to empower people. That's what a venture capital is really about. It's yes, obviously you have to create the returns for your own investors. But the way you do that is by making sure that your entrepreneurs are successful. And another analogy I have is, let me use a soccer analogy, since I grew up in soccer country. You have 11 players on the field. And that's typically the size of companies I invest in. They are the stars. They are the ones out there sweating, running for 90 minutes, scoring the goals. But you need somebody who's a coach who maybe has seen it or who can guide them and who is looking at other teams and what they're doing. So my job is more of a coach to help empower them to score as many goals as they can.
Love it.
Yeah, that really defines what we call leaders who care as well. And you defined also where, leaders who care really understand that their business model is much more valuable when you actually care about your employees, you care about what's going on, because you can attract the talent and they realize their business becomes even better and more successful because of it. It's not like you have to be either nonprofit or business. You can actually have impact and do well in business too. And what you said about your family reminds me of my family. My grandparents always used to say they were immigrants from Kiev. And so they used to say with a Russian accent, as long as you have your health, that's the most important thing, right? And then they say, and education is a close second. So, and they meant it. It wasn't a slogan or a brand, because what they went through. So I want to get to what your thoughts are on what's happening now. Technology is still zooming along. You got a pandemic, which is enough in its own right. You've got, racial injustice and hopefully social justice coming. We had a little earthquake the other day. We got a wildfire. Who knows what other Mother Nature has planned for us. So, but it's also been a time when people have almost had like a little bit of an awakening and time to think about what's important, and a little bit to what you were saying before. So what's your thoughts? What's your feeling of what our awareness is going to be at work, at play, in our community as time goes on here?
Well, Mark, I think you said it very well. You use a word that I'm going to adopt, awakening, right? I hope that we can look back to this time and look at it as the Great Awakening, because there are many, many problems in the world. There always have been, but the urgency of those problems right now has increased. I think climate change is one problem that you alluded to, between the wildfires, the earthquakes, etc. I think a lot of it has been exacerbated by human action, and the pandemic, as you pointed out, makes also should also help us realize that at the end of the day, we are one species in a much, much larger universe. That we're not as strong as we think, right? We're both stronger than we think, and we're also weaker than we think. So I think it's a fine balance between having conviction and humility. I think I certainly am trying to tell myself to be constantly reminded that there are millions of things I don't know, and probably will never know. But that if I work with others, I may be able to decipher some answers. So I'm calling here for collaboration. I think that's the way to move forward, as whether we are in the nonprofit world, whether we're in corporates, in businesses, in startups, in civil society, in government. It's about us extending our hand to each other and saying, all right, let's fix these problems, rather than blaming it on each other, or even worse, fighting with each other about them. I think let me go back to my boat analogy. We are all in one boat, whether we realize that or not.
Yeah, it's interesting you said, because one executive recently told me, he said, thank God the definition of leadership has changed, where I can be vulnerable. I don't have to know everything. I can ask for advice. I can be in a relationship with my employees. You mentioned the sports team thing. It used to be a coach or a boss had to be a so-and-so to make their players play better or their employees be better. You don't have to be that. But he was saying it's so much easier being this than being the jerk coach or boss, and it led to what we were talking about is what role, I want to ask you this question, what role do you think business leaders who care have to play now to handle what we call the three areas of well-being for talent, and that's their financial well-being, their physical well-being, their mental well-being. How do you see that the role that leaders should play to make sure that happens, and that it's good for business too?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what you're alluding to is authentic leadership, right? It's bringing your whole self and looking at other people like you would want them to look on you, right? It's the golden rule. So if you are managing people, or if you're being managed by someone, or if you're investing in someone or being invested by someone, understanding that other person, understanding their values, understanding their interests, and finding points of commonality. And I'll translate that very, very specifically to my world. I'm a VC right now, and I like to joke that VCs are called vulture capitalists for a reason. And there is some element of truth in this. There are VCs, or almost all VCs at some point can exhibit a behavior that doesn't create value for the entrepreneur, but creates value only for themselves. That hence the name vulture capitalist. But I also think that there's an overlap in interest. If there wasn't, we wouldn't have created so many amazing companies that have changed the world. And we're going to be creating them right now and creating more jobs, and pushing the boundaries of innovation is how we will solve many of the problems we have. So I at least put myself to the standard is, let me find out what this intersection of interest is. I can choose to operate in this intersection. There is a way for both me and you to win, rather than just me to win, or for just you to win. I think it is actually also wrong for me to play in such a way that all the value gets created and distributed to everybody else, but not to me, right? Like, that is not a sustainable business model. If you are doing that, then it is philanthropy perhaps, or it's altruism at its finest, and you should absolutely do that, but that is not a sustainable business. For a sustainable business, you find a way to work together. And when I'm looking at an entrepreneur, when I extend them a term sheet, I'm looking at their interest in mind also. I'm not going to try take as much as possible. I'm going to find a way that this works for both of us. When I'm working with them and giving them feedback on a particular initiative that they have, I'll try to understand why they're advocating for one position versus the other, and vice versa. If they have feedback for me, it is my job and my responsibility to also listen and perhaps agree or disagree, but at the very least to listen to that. So at least that's the approaches I take. I'm certainly not perfect. I certainly have a lot of way to go there, but I'm hopeful that that approach at least is the approach that is a constructive approach to business that ends up actually with the best outcomes.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
So, yeah.
And so, Amit, you spoke about you playing the role of a mentor now, and you're definitely one of the leaders who care, as we call it, for the amazing stuff that you've done in your career until now. And I know there's lots to go, but and you went to some of the top universities. You went to Stanford, you went to Harvard. What I want to ask you, and because there are a lot of young people watching this video, and you play the role of a mentor. So what is the one piece of advice that you would give to young people who are graduating from schools, business schools, or any sorts of schools, so that they can shape as leaders who care? Because we need so many more leaders who care like yourself. So what advice would you give them?
Oh man, take me out of that pedestal. I'm not that old yet. I'm not sure if I'm entitled to give advice. I learn something new every day, and I think that's what being a leader is you're open to learning until you're around, right? Like all my life, that's the approach I have. But when you're asking young people, and I hope I still qualify as one, I would say
you're such an inspiration for so many young people. So
oh boy.
Yeah. So and I'm sure a lot of inspiration. I mean, your advice would give a lot of inspiration to them to pursue careers like you did and become one of the leaders who care. So what advice would that be?
Well, that's very kind, Pratik. But I would say the advice is make choices based on the people that you would be working with, more so than the brand, more so than the company, more so than the salary. Like, look, obviously, not everybody has the luxury of that choice. You may need to take a particular job because you need the money, because you need perhaps to be at home to take care of a family, or perhaps you don't have a car and you can't get to a distance, right? So there are certainly limitations for all of us to different degrees. So I'm not advocating necessarily make a choice about just following your heart. What I'm advocating is within the choices that you have, within the universe that available to you, optimize for people. Optimize as much as possible, surrounding yourself with people that can teach you, that you can learn from, that you can share something and teach them also. You become, there's a sentence here, you become your 5 closest friends. I think there's truth to it. I've chosen as much as possible bosses that I could see myself becoming into. If there is somebody out there who is 5 or 10 years ahead of me, can I see myself becoming that person one day, right? If it is, then I look up to that person and respect that person, and I can learn so much from that person. So it's a very easy thing to say, but it's also a very hard thing to implement. And once again, within the constraints you have, everybody has constraints, some more than others, right? But within the universe you have, you do have some level of choice. And the biggest choice is how you react. That is the single biggest choice. That one is available to, I think, all of us. Is when faced with a situation, when faced with a challenge, when faced with an obstacle, how do I respond to that?
Yeah, I think you just concluded with a brilliant remark where it might not be perfect, but then it's up to you within that scenario to find what really is going to work and who you want to be as, and who your influencers are, basically. Your influencers that are going to impact your life. So right now there's about 10 kids applying to Stanford just because of what you just said.
I look, I applied almost 20 years ago. I think it's the bar has just gone up and up and up and up. I wonder if I should do the experiment of sending my application in again. It's ever better candidates coming through.
Well, you truly are, Pratik said, one of the leaders who care, and it's our pleasure to know you, to become friends with you more so, and to make a difference out there together. So, thanks for being on this series. Really appreciate it.
Honored to be here. Thank you both of you for organizing this, and thank you for everybody who's listening.